Estamos solos, es hora de hacer lo que hay que hacer, dijo la Apache a un ranchero en broma. The morning began like most mornings on the wide, open land near the border. The sky was pale blue and the air was still cool. The sun had not fully risen, but its soft light was already touching the dry ground. A rancher named Mateo stepped out of his small wooden house, holding a cup of warm coffee. He paused for a moment, looking across the land that had been his life for many years. The land was quiet, almost silent, except for the distant sound of animals and the wind moving gently through dry grass. Mateo was a man of routine. Every day followed almost the same pattern. He woke early, checked his cattle, repaired fences if needed, and made sure everything was in order. Living alone had become normal for him. At first, many years ago, the silence felt heavy, but over time he learned to live with it. The land taught him patience. It also taught him that when you are alone, you depend only on yourself. This place was far from busy towns and crowded roads. Very few people came here unless they had a reason. Because of that, every human interaction felt important, even small ones. Mateo knew most of the faces that ever appeared in this area. One of those faces belonged to an Apache woman named Elena. She passed through the land from time to time, sometimes alone, sometimes with others from her community. She was known for her calm nature, sharp eyes, and a quiet sense of humor. Elena and Mateo were not close friends, but they shared something unspoken. They respected each other's space and ways of life. When they met, they spoke little, but their conversations always carried meaning. There was no need for long talks or explanations. Both understood the land and both understood what it meant to survive on it. That morning, Mateo noticed movement near the old dirt path that ran along the edge of his ranch. He narrowed his eyes and watched carefully. Out here, you never ignored movement. As the figure came closer, he relaxed. It was Elena. She was walking at a steady pace, her posture straight and confident. She carried a small bag over her shoulder, and her eyes scanned the land as if reading a familiar story written on the ground. Mateo finished his coffee and walked toward the fence. When Elena reached it, she stopped and rested one hand on the wood. They nodded at each other, a simple greeting that needed no words at first. The wind picked up slightly, carrying dust and the smell of dry earth. "Morning," Mateo said finally. "Morning," Elena replied. Her voice was calm, almost soft but strong at the same time. They stood there for a few moments looking out at the land. The silence between them was comfortable. It was the kind of silence that came from understanding, not awkwardness. Mateo noticed that Elena seemed relaxed, but there was always something alert in her expression, as if she was always ready for whatever the land might bring. After a short pause, Elena glanced around. The land stretched wide in every direction. No other people were in sight. No vehicles, no animals close enough to disturb the quiet. She smiled slightly and said almost jokingly, "Estamos solos, es hora de hacer lo que hay que hacer." Mateo raised an eyebrow and smiled back. "Always straight to the point," he said. Elena shrugged. "That's how life is here," she replied. They both knew she was right. This land did not allow excuses. It did not wait for help to arrive. If something needed to be done, you did it yourself. That truth shaped everyone who lived here, whether they liked it or not. Elena leaned against the fence, her gaze drifting toward the distant hills. Mateo noticed how comfortable she looked, as if the land itself welcomed her. He wondered, not for the first time, what her life had been like growing up in this region. He had heard stories from others, but he knew stories were never the full truth. "You passing through?" Mateo asked. "For now," Elena said. "Checking on some things, making sure everything is as it should be." Even the animals seemed quieter. It made Elena's joke echo in his mind. "We are alone. It's time to do what needs to be done." The words stayed with him, not as humor, but as a reminder of something he had always known. Living here meant accepting responsibility fully. There was no one else to blame when things went wrong, no one else to fix mistakes. Mateo remembered his early days on the ranch, when he was younger and less experienced. Back then, he sometimes waited, hoping problems would solve themselves. They never did. He learned the hard way that action mattered more than hope. Alina's presence always brought these thoughts to the surface. She carried herself like someone who had learned similar lessons, perhaps even harsher ones. Her humor was not careless. It was shaped by experience, by history, and by survival. After a while, Alina pushed herself off the fence. "I won't stay long," she said. "Just wanted to see how things were here." The wind moved through the grass and a bird flew overhead, cutting through the open sky. Mateo felt a strange mix of calm and awareness. Encounters like this were rare but meaningful. They reminded him that even in isolation, life connected people in quiet ways. As Alina turned to leave, Mateo watched her walk away along the dirt path. Her steps were steady, confident, as if she knew exactly where she was going, even if she had not said it out loud. When she disappeared from view, the land felt empty again, but not lonely. Mateo returned to his work, but the moment stayed with him. Alina's words replayed in his mind as he checked the fences and walked among his cattle. The joke had been simple, but its meaning grew deeper the more he thought about it. Being alone did not mean being helpless. It meant being responsible. It meant facing reality without distractions. As the sun climbed higher, the land warmed, and life slowly resumed its usual sounds. Mateo moved with a renewed sense of purpose. He did what needed to be done, as he always had. But now the reminder felt sharper, clearer. That morning was not dramatic. Nothing unusual happened. Yet it marked something important. It showed how a simple moment, a few words spoken in humor, could reveal a truth that shaped lives. In places like this, truth did not need loud voices. It lived quietly in shared understanding and respect, and in the actions people took when no one else was watching. And so, the day continued, ordinary on the surface, but meaningful beneath. The land remained wide and silent, holding stories of those who lived on it. Mateo carried on, and somewhere beyond the hills, Alina continued her path, both guided by the same unspoken rule. When you are alone, you do what must be done. After that morning, life returned to its usual rhythm on the ranch, but something inside Mateo had shifted. The days passed as they always did, yet Alina's words stayed with him. They came back to him while he worked under the sun, while he ate his meals alone, and even when he lay awake at night listening to the wind. At first, he tried to ignore the thoughts, telling himself it was just a passing moment. But the land had a way of bringing certain ideas back again and again, especially when they were true. Mateo noticed how quiet the days felt after Alina left. The silence seemed louder than before. He realized that her presence, even for a short time, had broken the pattern of complete isolation. It reminded him that although he lived alone, he was still part of a larger world. People passed through this land, carried stories, and left marks that could not be seen but could be felt. As he went about his work, Mateo began thinking more about Alina. He remembered other times he had seen her over the years. She never stayed long, never explained much, and never asked for anything. Yet she always seemed aware of everything around her. She noticed changes in the land before others did. She sensed when something was wrong, even if it could not be explained easily. Mateo once heard an old neighbor say that some people learn to listen to the land as if it were speaking. Alina was one of those people. Her joke that morning now felt less like humor and more like a lesson she had learned long ago. Mateo wondered what experiences had shaped her into the person she was. While fixing a broken fence later that week, Mateo found himself remembering his own past. He had not always been a rancher living alone. Years ago, he had a family, neighbors close by, and plans that reached far into the future. Life had changed slowly at first, then all at once. Some people moved away. Others passed on. Responsibilities grew heavier, and one day he realized he was alone with the land. At that time, loneliness had scared him. He questioned whether he could handle everything by himself. There were moments when he wished someone would come and take over or at least share the load, but no one came. The land did not pause to give him time to adjust. Animals still needed care. Fences still broke. Storms still came without warning. Mateo learned through effort, mistakes, and persistence. Alina's words reflected that same truth. They carried the idea that waiting was not an option, that acting, even when unsure, was better than doing nothing. Mateo understood now why her humor felt different. It was shaped by real experience, not light moments. One afternoon, a strong wind swept across the ranch. Dust filled the air, and the sky turned a dull gray. Mateo worked quickly to secure loose items and guide his animals to safer ground. As he moved, he felt a sense of calm focus. There was no panic, no wasted movement. He simply did what needed to be done. In that moment, Alina's words returned again, clear and steady. "We are alone. It's time to do what needs to be done." Mateo realized that he had been living by that rule for years without ever putting it into words. Alina had simply spoken it aloud, turning an unspoken truth into something solid. Later that day, as the wind settled, Mateo sat on the steps of his house and looked out at the land. The storm had passed without causing much damage. He felt tired but satisfied. It was a familiar feeling, one he had grown to respect. It was the feeling of responsibility met, not avoided. His thoughts drifted again to Alina's life. He imagined her growing up learning similar lessons, perhaps even earlier than he had. He suspected that her humor was a way to soften hard truths, to make them easier to carry. Humor, when used that way, became a quiet strength. Days turned into weeks. Mateo continued his routine, but now he paid closer attention to small details. He noticed how the land changed with the light, how silence could carry meaning, and how moments of connection, no matter how brief, could leave lasting impressions. One evening, Mateo spotted smoke rising in the distance. It was faint but steady. He watched carefully, trying to judge its source. Out here, ignoring signs could lead to trouble. After some time, he recognized the direction. It was coming from an area Alina sometimes passed through. He felt a slight concern but reminded himself not to assume anything. Smoke could mean many things. The next morning, he rode out to check the area, not because he expected a problem, but because experience had taught him not to ignore instincts. As he approached, he found the source of the smoke. It was a small, controlled fire, already burned down to glowing embers. Nearby, he saw footprints he recognized. Alina had been there. Mateo felt a strange sense of reassurance. The fire had been handled carefully, meant to clear land, not harm it. It showed planning and control. It showed someone doing what needed to be done, quietly and responsibly. He did not see Alina that day, but her presence felt close. Mateo realized that even without words, people could communicate through actions. Alina's actions spoke clearly. She took care of things without needing recognition. As Mateo headed back, he thought about how different lives could share similar values. He and Alina came from different backgrounds, different histories, yet the land had taught them the same lessons. Responsibility, awareness, action. That realization made him feel less alone, even in the vast quiet. It reminded him that solitude did not mean separation from others. It simply meant fewer words, fewer meetings, but deeper understanding when those meetings happened. That night, Mateo slept more peacefully than he had in a long time. His thoughts were steady, not restless. He felt grounded, as if something had settled into place. Alina's joke had turned into a guide, something he carried with him now. The following days brought ordinary challenges. A gate needed repair. Supplies ran low. A long walk was required to check the far edge of the land. Mateo handled each task with steady focus. There was no rush, but no delay either. He began to see his life not as lonely, but as purposeful. Being alone meant his choices mattered more. There was no one else to correct mistakes or cover for them. That responsibility gave his actions weight and meaning. Every now and then, Mateo found himself smiling at the memory of Alina leaning against the fence, speaking those words lightly, almost playfully. He understood now that humor did not make the truth smaller. It made it easier to face. Part 2 of this story is not about big events or dramatic changes. It is about understanding. It is about how a simple moment can grow into a lasting lesson. It is about how people shaped by the land learn to live by quiet rules that guide their lives. As the days continued, Mateo carried on, stronger in his awareness, calmer in his solitude. Somewhere beyond the open fields and distant hills, Alina continued her path as well, guided by the same belief. When you are alone, you do not wait. You act. You take responsibility. And in doing so, you find strength where others might find fear. The land watched silently, holding their stories, steady and patient as it always had. The change inside Mateo became clearer as time moved forward. He did not speak about it to anyone because there was no one close enough to tell. Still, the difference showed in the way he worked, the way he planned his days, and the way he watched the land. He was more alert now, not because of fear but because of awareness. He understood better that every choice mattered. One early afternoon, Mateo noticed that the sky looked different. Clouds were gathering in a slow, heavy way. The air felt thick and even the animals seemed uneasy. He had seen this before. It was not a sudden storm, but one that built itself quietly, giving warning to those who knew how to read the signs. Mateo prepared as best as he could. He secured tools, checked shelters, and made sure his animals were in safer areas. While doing this, he felt calm. There was no rush, only steady action. He remembered times in the past when such weather would have made him nervous. Now he trusted his experience. As evening approached, the wind grew stronger. The clouds darkened and the first drops of rain fell slowly, then more heavily. The storm did not arrive with violence but with persistence. Rain fell for hours, soaking the ground and turning dirt paths into mud. Mateo stayed alert throughout the night, checking on things when needed. When morning finally came, the storm had passed. The land looked changed. Some areas were flooded and a section of fencing near a shallow stream had collapsed. Mateo sighed softly when he saw the damage. He did not feel anger or frustration. This was part of life here. The land gave and the land took. He gathered his tools and walked toward the broken fence. As he worked, he noticed footprints in the wet ground. They were fresh and not his own. He stopped and examined them closely. They were familiar. Alina had been there recently. A short distance away, Mateo saw her. She was standing near the stream, watching the water flow. Her clothes were damp at the edges and her hair was pulled back. She turned when she sensed his presence. "Looks like the storm had something to say," she remarked calmly. Mateo smiled slightly. "It always does." The fence had to be repaired and the stream guided so it would not cause more trouble. Without making a plan out loud, they began working together. Alina gathered fallen wood and stones, placing them carefully to redirect the water's path. Mateo focused on repairing the fence, reinforcing it to handle future storms. They worked in silence for a while. The sound of flowing water and their movements filled the space between them. There was no tension, only shared purpose. At one point, Mateo paused to rest his hands. Alina glanced at him and smiled faintly. "Seems like we weren't alone after all," she said. Mateo chuckled. "Still feels that way sometimes." Mateo realized that being alone did not mean refusing help. It meant understanding when help appeared and accepting it without question. They continued working until the situation was under control. The fence stood firm again and the stream flowed more smoothly. The land seemed calmer, as if it approved of their efforts. When they finished, they sat on a nearby rock, catching their breath. The sun broke through the clouds, warming the wet ground. Steam rose gently from the earth. "You didn't have to help," Mateo said. Alina shrugged. "The land belongs to everyone who respects it." They talked a little more then, sharing small details about their lives. Nothing too personal, but enough to understand each other better. Mateo learned that Alina traveled often, checking on places tied to her family's history. Some were still healthy, others needed care. "I fix what I can," she said, "and accept what I can't." As the sun climbed higher, Alina stood up. "I should go," she said. "There are other places to check." "When we're alone, we don't wait." Working together had reminded him that strength could be shared without becoming dependent. The days that followed were busy. The storm had left small issues scattered across the ranch. Mateo addressed them one by one. He noticed that his confidence had grown. Challenges no longer felt heavy. They felt manageable. One afternoon, while repairing a gate, Mateo thought about how much had changed since that simple joke by the fence. The words themselves were ordinary, but the timing had made them powerful. They had helped him see his life differently. He realized that Alina had likely spoken those words many times before, perhaps without much thought. For her, they were part of a mindset shaped by years of experience. For Mateo, they became a turning point. As weeks passed, the land slowly returned to normal. Grass grew greener in some places because of the rain. Animals moved with renewed energy. The damage from the storm became a memory. Mateo felt more connected to the land than ever before. He listened closely to its signs and trusted his instincts. He also felt more open to brief connections with others, even if they came and went quickly. One evening, as the sun set in warm colors, Mateo sat outside his house, watching the horizon. He thought about Alina and wondered where she might be now. He hoped her path was steady and her efforts meaningful. He understood now that people like her did not stay in one place for long. They moved where they were needed, guided by responsibility rather than comfort. That realization brought him peace. He did not need constant company. He needed purpose, awareness, and the courage to act. Part 3 of this story is about action shared, not spoken. It shows how understanding grows through experience, not explanation. Mateo and Alina did not promise anything to each other. They did not make plans, yet they shared something strong, a way of living shaped by reality. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Mateo stood up and went inside. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new decisions. He was ready. The land remained quiet, holding the memory of the storm, the work, and the brief meeting of two lives shaped by the same rule. When no one else is there, you do what must be done. And sometimes, without expecting it, someone else appears, not to save you, but to walk beside you for a moment. That knowledge stayed with Mateo as he moved forward, steady and calm, prepared for whatever the land. He no longer questioned his place or his choices. He accepted them fully. The ranch woke each morning the same way it always had. The sun rose slowly, painting the sky with soft colors. Birds appeared first, then animals, then the gentle movement of wind through grass. Mateo moved with this rhythm. He no longer felt separate from it. He felt part of it. Some days were easy. Others required long hours and patience. A water line needed fixing. A section of land needed clearing. Supplies had to be managed carefully. Mateo handled each task without complaint. He understood that life here was not about comfort. It was about balance. Often, while working, his thoughts returned to Alina, not in a restless way, but in a thoughtful one. He did not miss her in the way people miss close companions. Instead, he respected what she represented. She was a reminder that strength did not always speak loudly, and that responsibility did not need praise. He wondered how many people like her moved quietly through the world, doing what needed to be done without being noticed. The thought gave him comfort. It meant the world was held together by many unseen efforts. As weeks passed, Mateo noticed small changes in himself. He was more patient. When problems appeared, he did not react quickly or emotionally. He observed first, then acted. He trusted his judgment more than before. One afternoon, a traveler stopped near his land, asking for directions. Mateo spoke with him briefly, pointing the way and offering water. The traveler thanked him and moved on. It was a small moment, but Mateo realized how different it felt now. He no longer avoided contact, nor did he seek it. He simply responded when needed. That evening, Mateo sat outside as the sky darkened. Stars appeared one by one, bright and clear. The silence felt peaceful, not empty. He remembered a time when silence made him uneasy. Now it felt like a friend. He thought again of Alina's words. At first they had felt like a joke. Then they became a lesson. Now they felt like a truth he lived by without thinking. Being alone did not mean being lost. It meant being responsible for your own actions and choices. As the seasons slowly shifted, the land changed its colors. The air grew cooler. The work adjusted with the weather. Mateo prepared for colder nights and longer shadows. He worked steadily, never rushing, never delaying. One day, while checking the far edge of his land, Mateo found a small marker near the path. It was something Alina had left behind earlier, a simple sign to guide others who knew how to read it. Mateo understood its meaning. It showed that the area was safe and cared for. He smiled quietly. Even in her absence, her presence remained, not through words or promises, but through action. Mateo did not remove the marker. He respected it. He understood now that the land held many stories at once, layered and connected. No single person owned all of them. That night, Mateo reflected on his journey. He had not traveled far in distance, but he had traveled far in understanding. Life had taught him that strength did not come from control, but from readiness, from accepting reality as it was, not as one wished it to be. He realized that the lesson Alina shared was not meant for a single moment. It was meant for life itself. There would always be times when no one else was around to decide or act. In those moments, waiting would only bring regret. Action, even small action, was better. The days that followed were calm. Nothing unusual happened. Yet Mateo felt content. He no longer measured his life by big events. He measured it by steady effort and quiet purpose. Sometimes he imagined Alina passing through another stretch of land, helping where needed, moving on without ceremony. He felt certain she was doing well because people like her always did, not because life was easy, but because they faced it directly. One early morning, Mateo woke before sunrise. The air was cool and the world felt still. He stepped outside and breathed deeply. The land stretched before him, familiar and honest. He felt grateful not for comfort but for clarity. He understood now that life did not require constant company to have meaning. It required responsibility, respect, and the courage to act when necessary. Everything else was extra. As the sun rose, Mateo began his work, moving calmly and confidently. The land responded as it always had, offering challenges and rewards in equal measure. Far away, beyond hills and open ground, Alina continued her path. She did not look back often. She did not need to. She carried her understanding within her just as Mateo carried his. Their lives did not join, and they did not need to. They were connected by something deeper than presence. They shared a way of seeing the world, shaped by land, experience, and truth. The story does not end with a farewell or a dramatic moment. It ends with continuity, with life moving forward as it always does, with people doing what must be done, whether anyone is watching or not. Mateo's ranch remained quiet, steady, and alive. The land held its stories carefully, offering lessons to those willing to listen. And somewhere in that wide, open silence, the meaning of those simple words lived on. When we are alone, it is time to do what needs to be done.